Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode. Blue Grit Radio, this is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Mac from The Zen Cop. He is The Zen Cop. Mac, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this. This will be fun.
Yeah, man. No, it's been really cool to follow you and what you're doing and start to poke at your podcast. I did listen to you, conversing with our buddy BC Sanders, and so that was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. He's a really interesting dude. We talked a lot offline as well, and I enjoyed the content. And he and I had similar, upbringings with, our musical stuff, and then just kind of how we got into law enforcement. So he's a really cool dude. Disruptors podcast, if you guys haven't, check it out. There's a lot of good content on there and a lot of relevant speaking points, especially if you're working on the East Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just hopped on there, so that'll be airing. It'll probably be aired by the time this airs, and then he'll be coming on here. So,
Nice.
so yeah, a lot of cross connecting, all good stuff, man. I have the benefit of seeing, getting a purview into you, your faceless, as far as like a social media presence. But just for the listeners, I'm going to tell them about how you got the gym vibes behind you. You got a squat rack. I think you have a bob dummy, like a punching dummy back there.
Yeah, he's in the mirror, I think. This is full disclosure. I would have put more weight on to impress people, but
I can actually see it from my angle, so I'm just going to pretend there's like,
sure.
405 that you're curling or something.
My wife works from home, so it is a Monday. I'm off on Mondays, but I got to go to the garage today, so I am quite cold. It's been very chilly the past couple of days, so she wins, I lose, so here I am in the garage, and yeah.
Dude, I dig it. I dig it. The cold, it makes you more alert. I feel like I'm in a room that's the most, cool, maybe even drafty at times to the whole house, but it makes me alert, so it's all right.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, man. Well, I want to ask about and have you tell the listeners about your career, how it kicked up, but also I just want to ask you about the Zen Cop and where did that kick up, and maybe those can all be answered in one go. But yeah, like what brought you to social media and speaking on all these things that not a lot of cops do, or a lot of cops do confidently and competently?
Yeah, so I became a cop in 2010. I work in Northern California. I worked for a PD for a few years, and then I lateraled to a sheriff's department, which is where I am now. So I've been a detective for 5 years. I recently switched over to sex crimes and child abuse. Before that, I was in property crimes. Prior to that, patrol, worked on a specialty unit, the homeless outreach team, for a few years, helped start that. And, overall, I kind of look back on all of the things that I've done and seen over the years, and I think about, I guess, some of the things that we tend to downplay or don't necessarily even really acknowledge as, we just get used to it, I guess. You get used to this career and what it brings. And, by no means am I anything special. I consider myself to be just like the majority of cops out there who experience their fair share. And each person is going to have their individual limits when it comes to what they experience and how they process this and deal with it. And I equate that to, everyone's like a car, right? We have that mileage that we've talked about before, and we have that breaking point, and each car is going to be different, though. It's different how it's driven. The roads are different. So if I were to say, well, my career is linear to yours or whoever else's, that would be a very inaccurate statement. So over time, I started to notice a lot of things that were sort of coming out of the water, if you will, to in my career and my personal life. And in 2020, I don't know if it was related to everything that was going on, but I doubt it. I think it was cumulative. But I had a panic attack in July, which was by far the scariest fucking thing I've ever had happen to me. and that includes everything at work. So experienced that, and that ultimately led me down a very, very, very dark road for a long time. And keeping it into I guess in a sentence, that's what prompted my efforts. And we had a deputy who was shot and killed in 2019, and then a coworker who committed suicide in 2021. So those were also huge, I would say, staples where I was like, yeah, this is something that we need to address and something that we need to change. And I started typing one day, and writing for me has always been very therapeutic, and I enjoy it. And that turned into a blog, which turned into the podcast. And that's kind of what, in a nutshell, what started everything. And my whole thing in life is you should always give more than you take. And if you can, you should. And I can. And I've had people tell me over the years before any of this started that I was someone that they could talk to, or I just sort of had that natural ability to be someone they could confide in. And one of the more important qualities is the ability to listen. And so that was, part of what I did as well. So all that combined, when I decided to go public, I was a little hesitant because I didn't really know, if it would actually do anything. That's everyone's fears. Am I just talking to to a wall or what?
Yeah.
And hearing the feedback eventually, when I first started, I had a sergeant who stopped me in the hallway, and he was like, "Hey, I really enjoyed your post." And I was kind of like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, a lot of the guys are talking about it." Oh, that's cool. So after that, I officially let my agency know what I was doing. I didn't have a obligation to do that. We do have a policy that if you're going to have like a secondary source of income or a job they'd like to know, that I just put it out there that this is what I was doing. They signed off on it. They support it. And I have a lot of people from my office as well as across the United States who listen now, which is really cool. And like I said, if you can, you should. So if you feel like you can make a difference, do it. And when it comes to, I guess, the mental health aspect, there's not enough. We could, I'm a range master where I work. I could use YouTube and Instagram to write the next 4 quarters for curriculum because there's so much stuff out there. When it comes to the mental health aspect, there's a lot out there, but it's not as abundant. And like we talked about before offline and over the past couple of weeks, it's one of those things that is a difficult and sometimes taboo topic to bring up entirely.
Yeah, 100%. And man, I love the origin story, and I love how a lot of times someone challenges themselves or puts themselves out into a new lane, a new venture because of a need, and you explicitly felt that need and you saw that need. And I love the notion of paying it forward. I think that what's really fortunate and where I feel humbled, and I've spoken on this before, is interacting with folks such as yourself, right, in this space that are just trying to share story, right? Like I say the same thing. I'm just a guy. I'm a dude that does this job, does a certain aspect of this job, and I have certain experiences, and they're unique, but then again, they're not that unique, right? Like you experienced loss in your own agency. I experienced loss in my own agency. The circumstances are very different, but it all sucks. And trying to navigate that and be the best cop, be the best person, be the best family man I can, right? And like this is essentially like the mission. And I also like how you shared the vulnerability of just being like, man, is this making a difference? Is there a point to this? Because I feel like that's cyclical, even though there's been a steady growth in whether it's the social media or the podcast for me. But at the same time, I'm like, man, I'm putting in a lot of time into this, and it is taking away from other things because you always have so much limited bandwidth. But I feel like and this is not a unique experience either, right? Like I literally connect either on recording or off recording with others that are like, yeah, I literally had that thing last week where I'm like, what am I doing? Like, is this even helpful? Is this necessary? And then someone will reach out and say like, hey, it's really helped me out. I appreciate it. So, I think it's just continuing the good fight and just having more voices and more stories and more anecdotes to reduce the stigma, which is really the sense of why most of us even started having any of these conversations in the first place.
Yeah, stigma, I would say, is probably the biggest part of it. And my very first blog I ever wrote was shortly after we lost a coworker to suicide, and that was it was a unique experience because I've probably dealt with, I'm going to say, high hundreds of suicides since my career started. As a sheriff's office, we are still the coroner, so we'll do all the investigating, short of it being suspicious. And then even as a detective, if there is a suicide via firearm, we still go for the rule out just to say it's not a homicide. Suicides are, I've had a easier time explaining homicides to victim families, to talking about the ins and outs of what happened. And oddly enough, it's easier to explain a homicide than it is a suicide to family, because there's a how, there's a why, there's, you know, a method and a means, and they get to understand how their loved one was ultimately killed. With suicides, those are more times than not some of the most difficult cases you will work as a cop, because the family will sometimes just refuse to believe what happened. They will, you know, assume that their loved one would never actually do this. And it's common, but the mental tax that comes with dealing with that over and over again, especially when you get into the investigative role and you're dealing with victim management on a whole new level, sometimes with information and supplemental reports that really won't matter or count for anything, because it's not really a stat or an arrest. It's this long ongoing saga of just emotional drain and damage to both sides of the equation. But
Yeah.
I think that sort of, you know, that creates a stigma that's very difficult for most cops to talk about and navigate. And especially when it comes to the cop themselves, if they are feeling, you know, even slightly like that might be creeping up as an issue, that's a conversation that I don't think anyone would necessarily feel comfortable talking about. But with cop world, when you do, you know, verbalize something, the biggest concern is, you know, our job, our livelihood. Are they going to put me on leave? Are they going to take my guns? Like all this stuff that we think about, that, you know, it's so funny how those are our concerns, right? Not the actual mental health aspect of our mind and body, but more so the job. And I've said this before thousands of times. And, you know, if Bill goes out for injury because he hurt his back, well, okay, cool. Good luck, Bill. We hope we see you soon. If Josh goes out on injury for something and no one knows what it is, and they find out that it's a mental health issue, there's a lot of judgment. I mean, shit, there's judgment if you get hurt for real in cop world. Like, when are you coming back, man? You broke your leg, but like, we're short staffed. We need you. Yeah. When it comes to the mental health stuff, I think that people will even be more inclined to not acknowledge it, because no one wants to get the shit, or nobody really just wants to be put in that light that could, you know, compromise trust. And, you know, the list goes on. And thankfully that stigma is changing, but it's a very slow change with a small percentage of the agency buying into it. And unfortunately, just like any other issue in cop world, we generally don't address it until it becomes an issue, which is sort of just one of those things we do as a family, as we're just one of the most dysfunctional families in existence. When it comes
like
to,
when you say it, when it grows to an issue, it's like a over the top, like,
yeah, it has to boil
like flip
over.
the Thanksgiving table over issue, right?
Yep.
Like undeniably terrible.
And that's the only time where it may even get high enough to reach. And I'm not saying that admin doesn't listen, but they're so high up and disconnected that it's not their fault. Sometimes things happen on a very low level that doesn't go beyond the patrol sergeant, and that's fine. That's just how rank and file works. But if you sat down with, you know, your entire patrol team, or just, I guess, sworn in general, and you took like an anonymous survey, I think admin would be blown away with the results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I think it is worth recognizing that, yeah, it's not like pointing fingers at admin or, you know, the top bosses, and everyone has a seat, but everyone else has a role too. And when you talk about culture, like that corrosive, toxic culture where there's a stigma with mental health, there's a stigma with physical health. Like, that's so true. And it's everyone's fault in a way, right? It's our shared fault, and we eat our own. And man, like, whether it's a cop that steps off a curb and like twists his ankle, you'd be like, really, bro? You know, you'll have every single department, I guarantee you, in the nation, there's going to be like a really, bro, and then there's also like, man, that sucks. But the man that sucks people aren't saying it very loudly. They're just like thinking it, and they're just kind of moving on. But man, like, even after my shooting, like, I had 2nd-degree burns in my arms, and those close to me and those that knew me, like, saw my arms all wrapped up, or they saw it kind of blister up like after the fact, and it was pretty gnarly. But even, you know, a couple weeks after the incident, someone later shared, like months later, shared another officer I work with saying, "Hey man, like a lot of these guys are back to work, but why isn't Tongue back to work?" He's like, "Do you know how badly his arms got burned, bro?" Like, and then it was just because he saw me doing stuff in the summer, like on social media, and he's just like, "Well, dude can work. Clearly, he's like walking around doing his thing." They're like, "You want him to get all infected?" And it took, luckily, that guy, and I wasn't mad about hearing that interaction, but it was kind of like, seriously, dude? And then luckily that person, addressed it, because it doesn't help to kind of do that gossiping or rumor milling, but it is literally like an example of what we deal with and how our culture is reacted to things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's just always going to be something, and it's a pretty rough environment. You have to have thick skin, and I know that the majority of the ball busting is just that. It's just having fun. But when it becomes personal, like even the stuff you mentioned about him seeing you on social media, God forbid I'm walking. I'm so sorry that I'm able to be mobile. Like it's hard because I think everyone's sort of fighting their own fight. It's difficult, especially with staffing, especially with morale and all the other things that we're facing right now that go beyond just doing the work. And that goes into our family life as well and stuff like that. But I think that if everyone would work a little bit harder at supporting each other, and it's okay to be cynical. That's just kind of how it happens sometimes. And sometimes we have bad days. Sometimes we say things we don't mean. But if we made more of an effort to support each other and understand, I had a partner of mine a couple weeks ago. He said, I'm going to take Friday off. And everyone said, good for you. Like you should do that. And it was kind of neat because that was the first time in a very long time that I had heard and genuinely like, no, dude, take the day off. And it was other stuff that was going on. He just finished up a really big case and he didn't need to come to work on Friday, and everyone supported it. So I think if we made more of an effort to do that, especially when it was, needed. And this individual is a very hard worker. So to hear him say, I don't want to come in on Friday, was kind of like, oh, okay. Are you good? Was the first question. Yeah, I'm good. I just don't really feel like going to work. And I want to have a 4-day weekend. Fine. And our boss, who is also very supportive, said, hell yeah, take the day off. But it is individuals who can abuse it. And every agency will have that one guy or gal or multiple guys and gals who are their entire career is getting hurt. And there's a fine line between, we know what you're doing and we hope you get better. And unfortunately, those individuals also create very, I would say, unhealthy relationships with EAP and with other entities that control the benefits process. So when you actually get hurt, you kind of feel like you're being cross-examined. Like, I feel like I'm telling you the truth, but you don't believe me.
Yeah.
I tore my Achilles a couple years ago, and it was my first like major injury. And I was shocked at the questions I got, and I really felt like they were accusing me of lying, as my Achilles is literally ripped in half. So we do it to ourselves.
Which sounds terrible. That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the movie Hostel.
Never saw it, to be honest.
I
know what it's about, but I never saw it.
There's someone gets their Achilles severed, and it's pretty gnarly. But
it made me think of Pet Cemetery when the little kid slices that dude. Yeah, no fun.
Like the throwback, like the original.
Yeah. How old are you?
I'm close in age to you. Are you 38?
Yeah, 30. I'll be 39 soon. Yeah.
Yeah. We're the same.
Yeah. So that was a very terrifying image in my head. It makes my right leg hurt really bad. But yeah, it was sad to think that there are people now. That's a physical injury. So I can say, here's the scans, here's the doctor telling me this is torn. I have to be off work for how many times they didn't do
and you're
surgery.
still scrutinized, and you have exactly reports and images.
So imagine the person who says, I don't feel well and I can't tell you why. Even I can't even imagine that person that says, yeah, I don't really know what's going on, but I feel like I'm going to blow my head off. And the level of scrutiny that's going to come from every angle. And I always tell people this: you're paying for an attorney. Well, I should say in California, our dues pay for our attorneys. So if you're paying for it, use it. I got an attorney a couple of weeks after they were dicking me around, and suddenly I had appointments. I had all this stuff because my attorney was doing his job. So
was that L&I or was that your I guess jurisdiction, like the county?
What's that? I didn't hear the first.
Was that L&I or was that the like workers' comp?
Yeah, so we and our county, we pay our dues into our representation for attorneys for
Hmm.
whatever the case may be. So usually it's injury, and they'll represent you up until the percentage and the ranking and all that stuff. So it is a little bit easier. You do have to pay them a certain amount, but it's worth it in the long run. I've watched guys fight for years and years and still to this day have not resolved their issue. But yeah, I always tell people you're paying for it to include EAP. So when you sign up and they tell you you're out of sessions and you're not eligible for more, that's bullshit. You can create a new issue, and that's the best part about this world. Your entire work week, if you go to talk to someone at EAP, you can pick something from your one of your days that fucked you up, and it's valid.
Certainly.
So use it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I like how you return back to the comparison between physical injury and mental injury, right? Because, I gave my example of, post OIS, but truly, and I've reflected on this, like I had 6 weeks off until I was cleared for duty. But man, like I wouldn't give up that 6 weeks in hindsight. And I think that I would have felt compelled, either not me necessarily by my agency, but just by cultural norms to return after roughly 2 weeks, as was standard through so many decades, right? Probably not even decades, right? Years. And who knows, like, I know that there's agencies where you respond to something and then you're back at work, like finish your shift, right? Or next day kind of thing, or same week. And that's like, man, we gotta buck that trend. But as far as like me, there's officers that were in my same incident that had a host of responses, and I feel fortunate in a lot of ways that, especially because I was returning right back into patrol, which wasn't the commonality of that my group of officers. But yeah, like I probably would have felt rushed and probably rushed myself back if I didn't have that physical injury to govern that timeline, if that makes sense. And I highly encourage all my guys take time, even if they're not a trigger puller. Like we know, I mean, we learned in academy that it's the people that don't shoot frequently that are more affected, and that you're going to have that more and more, understandably so. You're going to have more non-shooters that might have been right there. Maybe they could have, they decided not to. And like, let's recognize the psychological impact and the stress and the trauma with that, even of a, kind of dusted off kind of, non-incident. Well, no, that was still a significant incident that you ran your mind through that whole thing, what that would look like as an OIS. So let's treat it more like that than not.
Yeah, that the rule that I have for any critical incident or anything that involves a question, if you ask yourself, am I ready? And you have to think about it for more than a few seconds, the answer is no. And don't rush it. Everyone has that guilt. Not guilt, that's the wrong word. I would say more of a drive. Like, I got to go back to work. I got to go back to work. And it's good to have that drive, because if you're a good cop and you're a good team player, I'm not saying that you're not going to enjoy your vacation, but you're going to be thinking, okay, what if something happens and I miss it? And not necessarily that you're going to be part of the action, but just you're going to miss something that you could have either helped or, just sort of positively influenced. And the funny part is with shootings, those are oftentimes some of the most successful recoveries, because we train over and over again for this scenario. And when it does happen or even comes close to it, we have all of these tools that are built into our head already. What we don't train enough for, and I don't know if there is a way to train for it other than, I guess, preparing ourselves mentally, are some of the more traumatic calls that we go to that don't even really involve a law enforcement response. Pick your catastrophic incident, pick your critical incident, or just something as simple as a little kid dying and having to deal with the mother for a half an hour. That will rock your world if you haven't experienced it before.
Absolutely.
And where have we trained for, how that's going to make me feel? And some may say, oh, well, that's kind of like placating and going, no, it's really not. That's all tied into everything else we do. So doing these things day after day and being successful in them is awesome, but there's still that mental lag where we're going to have a connection to the majority of the calls that we go to. And over time, just dealing with it in repetition, that's where we can build up that, breaking point to where the individual suddenly just can't deal with it anymore. And it's wild, because investigating the OIS stuff and seeing a lot of the guys actually really, if everything's like in line and everything works out positively, and I'm not saying that the loss of human life is positive, but sometimes, de-escalation comes at 900 feet per second. That's the way it is. And we have to move forward with that. But some of the mindsets and attitude that I see with shooters, or even just use of force in general, is they generally feel like they did the right thing. They can process it mentally and move forward. I feel like those are the sort of more successful turnarounds. And when we compare it to, say, someone who did CPR on an infant for 15 minutes, it's a very strange dynamic between those two.
Mm-hmm.
But how many times do we do a debrief for some of the scenarios like that, when we debrief just about everything that has the, quote unquote tactical element to it, which is great, and we should. I'm not saying we should debrief every single incident, but if it's noteworthy, and this goes to a supervisory level as well, and I'll speak to supervision as a whole. You don't have to have stripes to be a boss. I mean,
Absolutely.
you do technically for the rank and file stuff, but to be a leader among your group, if you saw something that was noteworthy, if you saw a coworker who had to deal with something and you're noticing something, and you mention it to your boss and say, hey, we should probably do a quick little debrief or something, those little things can make a huge difference. And that's based on things that I've seen over the years, and seeing the benefits of doing a stress debrief for something that would even just potentially be an issue, because you're going to thank yourself later for doing that versus not doing it. And then after months and years, you're dealing with an employee who you've essentially lost mentally, and that creates a lot of liability.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good points you made, and one of them is that we should be debriefing, like CISD, critical incident stress debriefs. Like we do them for basically any kid involved thing, right? Whether it's like a car pet or something like that, because those are the ones that universally affect people. And if we're gonna start moving the needle, like that's what I've seen, at least. That's where people are pretty unapologetic and pretty willing to be vulnerable. Like, yeah, that really sucks. Kid calls suck. Like that's what every, even the tough, hardened, kind of gristled, salty, whatever you want to call them, which is like, cool, at least we have a common ground to start on. And so for cops or agency folk that are hearing, some of these conversations, and they feel like their agency or their culture might be very resistant to all these things, and maybe you start there, right? But that's a good point, right? Like we train all these things, we discuss OIS, even if our agency isn't the type that deals with it very frequently, or maybe you never had it in the history of your town. If you're probably watching videos, you're probably watching videos and breaking it all down. But are we having the conversations to just really bring home, hey, when a call affects you in a very significant way emotionally, like what are your support mechanisms, and what are we providing in-house? What are we suggesting out of house? Like, what are we socializing to that degree? And I also love how you talk about the informal leaders, because everyone can recognize the power of informal leaders, and sometimes they're a force for good, sometimes they're a force for not so good, but they are unbridled by the rank structure, where sometimes it is the senior officer that has the clout, from above and below, that can say the necessary thing that needs to be said, and they don't have stripes, they don't have bars or stars, and they can say it, and they can say it in a way that everyone can be like, yeah, we're in agreement, you're right, and we can start working on that thing.
Yeah, I think that if you have the right, and this goes to credit a good supervisor, to trust your guys. And trust is a huge issue right now with law enforcement overall. I feel like now more than ever, we are dealing with a new generation who I think is motivated again. A few years ago, post 2020, I was talking to a lot of guys, interviewing people and talking to them about the current climate, and it was horrible. We had the worst possible applicants that would normally be told, no, thank you. We'll call you, don't call us, please. And now those are the guys that we're slapping a belt on and throwing them in a car with an FTO and hoping everything goes right. The good thing, I think, is that we're a few years out of it, so people are starting to come back to this career field and say, okay, I want to do this job. But that being said, if we don't continue to motivate people the right way, well, then we're going to see a huge or potentially negative shift on the road. And now more than ever, I would say public safety should be at the forefront of everyone's concern. I don't think the majority of people realize just how bad crime is right now. And that's not just for California, that's nationwide. And we're hearing a
Well, we
lot of
keep
these.
seeing headlines that
Yes,
across the nation, right?
that
Like crime rates are down, and I
they're
post some
down.
of
They're
them
down.
just to share, and it
Uh-huh.
wisely because we're in the industry. A ton of people usually comment saying, "Yeah, that's reported crime," or "Yeah, that's because people
Correct.
stopped calling." And
Correct.
anyone in a community meeting will confirm that. They're like, "We don't even call you because we don't want to bug you."
Yep. And compare that number to the increase in homicides nationwide. So that's
Mm-hmm.
that's an inaccurate statement. And yeah, retail theft is down because nobody calls the cops in California anymore, especially
Yep.
in San Francisco, LA. So yeah, it looks like it's down. Yet their losses are I think 7 million or something per store annual, something crazy.
And they
So
shut
no,
down
it's
stores. Yeah, like
they've been
the
shutting them
big
down in San
Targets and all
Francisco.
that downtowns. Yeah.
Hmm. So it is important that we have individuals who are motivated to go out. And I always have been a huge proponent of the POP mentality and problem oriented policing, for those who don't know, to
Mm-hmm.
go out and create a community policing mindset. And some people get really weird about community policing because they associate it to social media. I'm not talking about TikTok bullshit. I'm talking about going out and talking to people
Talking to people.
one-on-one.
Yeah.
Yeah, go walk into your businesses, walk into the local wherever, and strike up a conversation and get to know your stakeholders in your community and have conversations about the issues they're facing. Most people in your area will give you good info, and I cannot stress the importance of conversation and getting to know, especially the day shifters. Night shift, you're going to talk to all the bad people, but even the bad people will give you info if you're smart
Mm-hmm.
enough. So you have to immerse yourself in your beat. And I can really attest to keeping the same beat for a long time. It's okay to move around, but if you become a known name within your community, hopefully for the right reasons, that you will start to see a decrease overall in criminal behavior and an increase in proactivity, especially if you have these newer guys that are afraid to go out and get their hands dirty. And some of the best ways to do that is just to go, hey man, come with me and we're going to go do this, that, and that. And I'm not going to let you get hurt. I'm not going to let you get fired or killed, but I want you to go out there and make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that kids, especially the younger generation, I say kids, but 19, 20, 21 years old, they have to understand that in order to be successful, you really have to screw up a lot. And the screw up part, that scares people because they think about getting fired and they think about, the George Floyd stuff is still in the back of their minds. And that's good, but they also have to understand that it's a very small percentage of what can actually happen to you in this job.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of what we do day in and day out, even though it is dangerous, we are far more successful than we are not. And if you're doing the job within the parameters of law and policy, you're going to be okay. And if you
Yeah.
do make a mistake and you can articulate why, fine. But I just can't stress that enough. And that comes from, leadership top down, right? Your FTOs, your corporals, your sergeants who are,
Yes.
not telling you, no, don't, I'm worried. If you have a sergeant who is, one of those guys, and we all know them, that kind of overthink things. And there's a fine line between overthinking and being just not confident. And when you have guys that are saying, no, I can, and they say, why? Well, case law. Well, that's the end of that conversation. And there should be some trust. And if the trust isn't there and those guys start to see incompetence or even just a little bit of their supervisor not really supporting them, well, you're going to kill proactivity for that entire shift until the sergeant leaves or until they leave.
Yeah. I love how you went exactly where I would have gone with that note, which is that your bosses, your managers, your supervisors, your trainers, your field trainers, right? Like they are establishing, and yourself, right? Ownership of the young cop to know case law, to study, to ask questions, right? These are establishing the bumpers, right? So you don't have the gutter ball. And once you have those bumpers established through policy, through training, all these things, yeah, like you will stay within the lanes. And yeah, we're gonna make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. But we can't be paralyzed with fear. And we talk about, man, fear makes, like, I connected back to what you're saying about trust. There's a lack of trust in a lot of agency culture, with the bosses and the line level. And so you have that disconnect. And then you could even expound that out to lack of trust and awareness and connection with the community, because will you be a better, more effective cop if you actually connect with the community? Yes, 100%. Like, it's get out of your car, talk to people. And one of the best ways to navigate even the risk that you're talking about, right? This post-Floyd world where we don't want to come off as like harassing people and just like, just asserting ourselves. Well, talk to people, and you'll quickly find reasons to conduct your job in the way that the community wants you to, right? You talk to an apartment manager, they will tell you 5 units, like right off the bat, like off the top of their mind, as far as like who is wreaking havoc on the rest of the neighborhood and who you need to turn your attention to. And that goes from the narrative of harassment to problem-oriented policing, right? Directed patrol, not just randomly driving around looking for chippy stuff. Like you can actually be more effective, more efficient with your effort and build that trust and build your legitimacy. So it's all intertwined.
Yeah, trust. It's one of those things where I compare it to the toothpaste theory, where it's really easy to squirt it out, but putting it back in is really hard. So
Yeah.
if we have something that happens that's positive with the community, great. If we screw something up, then we have to repair that. And it sometimes can take months or even years, depending on the circumstance. And I work near Sacramento, and they had an OIS 4 or 5 years ago now. Anyway, the short version was they good shoot all day long. Cops did what they had to do, and it was unfortunate that someone died, but in the end, it was a good shoot. Everything worked out. But the aftermath that they dealt with, that they're still sort of dealing with today, just goes to show how the community will look at the agency, and every incident after that will become a big question mark. Where if you have the agency that is proactive and transparent, there's no easy way to say that the cops killed somebody, and unfortunately, that's a hard thing to deliver. However, if everything was done within policy and more importantly within law, and you come forward with it as soon as possible in accordance to what your policy says, I think that that's a huge leg up, and I'm glad to see more agencies that are doing that quickly and answering questions quickly that they can answer. I don't think that the majority of the public understands that there's just some things that can't be released yet, or it does take a few days to get things together. It's a big deal when someone pulls the trigger, and there's a lot of moving parts. And I don't think that any agency is intentionally being secretive. They just want to make sure they have all the information, because sometimes you can put information out too fast, and that can compromise the investigation. It can compromise court proceedings. So the happy medium of getting the information out there quickly, more importantly, is when you do make a mistake, it's just better to own it. I watched so many of these critical incidents go down, and the agencies that just put it out there, it kind of petered out within a week or two. And the agencies that, I don't want to say they were hiding it, but delayed the information release, they paid for it later. And it's two separate fields of thought. But for the majority of the individuals out there, even the ones who are necessary, or I would call them neutral in their perception of police, they still want to know what happened.
Yeah.
And in a job that may require us to use a variety of force options, I think it's always best to just have a very transparent optic when it comes to information sharing.
100%. And, it's like, hey, we got to get out in front. And I've seen some agencies, right? And I've heard officers account from, their agencies from all over that say, yeah, their administration or their city is too reactive, right? So they just start churning things out, and they put out these statements that make it sound like they might be sorry, or like the bomb might be dropping, and you don't even know, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know. Hey, at this time, and you see a lot of city officials and police leaders do a great job of this nationally, right? Where they just say, hey, we're currently investigating an officer-involved shooting. The officers involved will have a standardized administrative leave. This is per policy. With the details so far, this is what we have. And so we don't have any sign of foul play. You're not saying that there's no foul play. At the same time, you're getting out and saying, hey, there's nothing concerning from my angle right now, which is so huge for the officers, and not just those involved, but everyone in that camp. Everyone's watching and listening, and they're like, okay, cool. We're not just being hung out to dry. We're not just, being warned that the bus is coming, right? And so just be fair to it. And you can say, like, I don't know. Like, wouldn't you rather hear I don't know than I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm not even going to address it. Press conference is over. And you kind of
say the one wrong thing. All they got to say is the wrong word, and all of a sudden that investigation will change. And it's all in the verbiage, and it's okay. And no one likes to hear the phrase, well, we don't have that information at this time, or the investigation is ongoing, but it is. And I hope that the public would respect that they're trying to do the most, accurate investigation possible. And a lot of people don't understand is that when it comes to those investigations and being a part of those investigations myself, it's our job to discover the truth, not guilt or innocence,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're trying to find out exactly what happened, and the information will lay out whatever that is. And as long as there's an understanding, and I think that's kind of one of those things where unless you work this job or you're somehow attached to it, it's very hard to grasp all the internal workings that comes with a law enforcement career and all of the rules that we do have to follow. And being a cop in California, we're some of the most highly trained and educated, and the list goes on. And I mean, training, we could talk about that too, but if I had to kind of pick a point in the US where a lot of these things keep happening, it's kind of the same general area, usually the Midwest, usually with cops who have a 90-day academy and not a lot of training. So going back to something that's kind of funny, during the Floyd stuff, they were talking about how I think it was a barber or cosmetologist goes to school longer than a cop. And I laughed when I heard that because it's not true. For California in particular, we do about 900 hours and change, about 6 months worth of training. So that's just the academy. When we get out of the academy and we get hired with an agency, we go through FTO. Dependent on the recruit or the new hire, that could be 6 months, it could be a year. So I'll just call it 9 months, plus in California a probationary period that's usually 18 months. So that's almost 3 years of liability checking, of making sure that this individual is right for the job, to include an 18-month period where you can be fired for any reason. So that is a true perspective. Almost 3 years of training in the academy, monitored police work, and then you're kind of off leash, but you're still on to some degree. So again, going back to the misconceptions and just some of the things that are glossed over, I feel like that the majority of the people feel like there's not enough training. But as a cop in California, I agree, because I get a lot of training. Is it enough? No. There's so much more stuff that we could do that we don't. And I know you're in Washington, but you guys are kind of in the same boat in terms of trainings and whatnot. But even the most trained cop in the US would still say, I still feel like we need more of this. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, there's two angles I want to hit that from. And one is that, yes, there is so much need and opportunity for more training. However, at a certain point, you can do your pre-academy work, you can do your academy, you can do your field training, but at a certain point, you gotta take the training wheels off to really learn and thrive and grow. Like, you have to do the thing. At the same time, I do appreciate, like, one of my police leaders that says, hey, he comes from a mechanic background, and he says, you do not want a brand new mechanic working on your car. It takes a couple years to learn all this, right? So where you can hedge that is recognizing what I just said, because people are going to be like, dude, Tongue, you just said you got to cut them loose. You need engaged supervisory, right? And that's going to be agency dependent, right? Do you have a culture of mentorship? Do you have a culture that isn't like, hey, get out of here, get out of my sight, kid? Like, I only want to hear about something if like a body drops, which is like an old school thing that, some people remember those notes, and maybe, I'm sure it still exists to some degree, where the first line supervisor is MIA unless you call, unless there's a huge deal, and they don't really want to see you. Whereas we have this culture where our profession is so young, largely due to the mass attrition, that we need everyone like invested. We need everyone engaged, like all hands on deck. So it's not just the first lines, it's your field trainers. Even when you don't have a student, like, sorry, you're going to be kind of the field trainer for like 3 solo officers for a while. Or your whole crew is kind of going to you, your corporals. And again, going back to the unofficial leaders, just the people that know the job. Yeah, it is more work, but this is your team, right? This is your investment. So everything you put in is what you are going to get out of it for your team.
Yeah, totally. It's neat, and it's kind of scary because I feel like the FTOs are so young, and every department is dealing with this nationwide, where we saw a lot of retirements, we saw a lot of early exits because of COVID, and as a result, we sort of have this new group where the average FTO is probably between 3 and 5 years on, which is crazy to think, because most of us who started a while ago, FTOs were usually 10 to 15 years. It was this sort of a collective in terms of knowledge among that group, where they harbored 150 years of experience between the entire FTO team. Now it's maybe 20 or 30. And to your point, yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said about keeping track of, the new guys on the road and helping them. And the one thing that I always encourage, and I say this a lot, especially to the newer guys, is go out, and if there's something that comes up that you haven't done, take it.
Mm.
Or go to that call and tell the guy, hey, if you want to take primary, cool. Can I hang out and watch? I've never done a rate before. I've never done a 211 before. I've never done this before. And if they give you the chance, take primary and do things that you've never done before as much as possible, because you will thank yourself later. And it's okay to be scared. We all were the first few years we were cops, because no one wants to say they've never done something before.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to be the guy to raise their hand and say, nope, not me. I've never done that. Use that to your advantage and expose yourself to as much as possible, especially in the first 5 years. We have that thing in California, the talk, read, sing, first 5 California for kids. It's the same thing for cops. So talk, read, sing. I mean, I guess we could change that to something different, but go and do as much as possible and engage. And if you've never written a Ramey warrant, say something, write it. If you've never written a search warrant, write it. It's not that hard. And after you do it, you're going to go, wow, that was easy. And the next time you do something, it'll be all the more easier because of repetition. And that's just one of those things where I feel like there's 2 types of cops that we see all the time. There's the cops who really want to go out and do the job, get their hands dirty. And there's the cops who just sort of want to be a cop and not do the work.
Like, it sounds cool. I want to,
yeah, it sounds cool. And I'm going to go drive around. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to wear this uniform and walk around. And what am I really doing for the community? Well, not a lot. And those individuals are pretty easy to spot, because when something does go down, they're the ones who usually are, grabbing the crime scene log or something else. And not to knock crime scene log, that's a very important
necessary
job.
Yeah.
But
if it's always the same person that's always doing that and always getting containment and always, well, I'll get on the backside because fingers crossed the guy doesn't jump out the back. Like,
yep. And so get to know your team, and as a supervisor, or even just a team player type mentality, if you see those things happening, it's perfectly okay to say, hey, Joe, I've noticed that you've never taken primary before on this. Like, do you want it, or do you want to come watch me do it?
mm-hmm.
And don't do it in public. Don't call them out. A good leader will always, praise in public and talk to them in private. And it's okay to go, hey, man, if you don't know what you're doing, it's fine. Say something. If you don't know how to do this, say something. And a good supervisor, and I was lucky to go through quite a few. When I was on weekend graveyard, we went through sergeants like underwear, but it was neat to see about every 2 or 3 months the caliber of leadership that would come through our door. And the really, really good ones, they spent a lot of times or a lot of time in investigations. So they were usually detectives, or they did some type of specialty assignment. Those were the guys who came in that literally you kind of felt like it wasn't a sergeant, more like a beat partner. And they would run around with us and have fun. And that was such a refreshing feeling to have, in contrast to some of the guys who you knew they didn't know what they were doing. You knew that you actually probably knew more than they did about certain stuff, which was kind of weird. And when it came to some of the, hotter calls or some of the more critical ones, it was very apparent that they had no clue what they were doing. And as soon as you show that side as a supervisor, your guys are going to lose faith in everything. And we've talked about this already once before, but morale is such a huge part of that. And as soon as you kill that morale, it's very hard to instill motivation again and again and again, because that's all this job is. It's trying to do the same thing every day or night to some degree, trying to make a difference, trying to not screw up and go home safe. It's a long list that we have to check off every day. I think if most people just acknowledge that, and more importantly for the things that I do and talk about off duty, and acknowledging the importance of having a balanced life. Balance is such a huge part of everyone's life, right? We all have to balance stuff. But when it comes to, I would say, shift work or public service specifically, I mean, we're talking about cop stuff, but I think if you look at public service, especially from the emergency perspective, right, the emergent need, there's going to be so much stuff going on in your brain and your body that it's really hard to comprehend all of it. And if the average person really understood just how fucked up their brain actually is, and how scary it can be, and how it can control so many physical symptoms in your body, that you would be surprised to to find out that it was just stress.
Yeah.
And when you hear that word, you're like, well, stress, I'm not stressed. It's like, no, the fuck you are. You are super stressed,
Yeah.
blood pressure, all of these things that I think a lot of us as cops don't look at until it becomes a problem. And so for the audience and for anyone listening, I don't care how old you are or young you are, it's never too early to make that a priority and to understand that everything we do every day is toxic for our body. And there's no way to fight that other than your attitude, your mindset, physical fitness, physical everything, and mental wellness. So days off, what are you doing? Are you sitting around the house, which is okay. It's perfectly okay to have downtime, but there's also this part of us that needs to keep moving. I encourage people to find a hobby, to find something and make it an individual thing. It doesn't have to be a group setting, but I'm huge on some of the small things, meditation being a huge, huge thing that can change your life if you really apply yourself. And I know a lot of guys go, I don't want to do that. It's stupid. You just sit there. No, it's a tool that you can use anywhere. People think of meditation, they think of the traditional where you're just kind of sitting there. No, it's totally different. You can lay down, you can go into a dark room for 3 minutes and just be alone. And that's going to change your heart rate. It's going to change your blood pressure, breath work and breathing, all of these things that we can do when we are stressed. And I can't stress this enough, but as cops, you're going to drive so many places and do so many things. You can take those moments to, just sort of connect mentally and decompress and breathing. I really can't stress that enough. If people put more of an effort into all of those things, I think we would see better cops. But again, it's that buy-in. And there's a lot of guys who are like, well, I don't need it. I don't want it. I've never seen anything, more amazing than a cop who can embrace the mental side of things and embrace it with a positive attitude. And then also just acknowledge that this job is going to be hard enough. And if we don't make that a priority day in and day out, and that's the key with balance, you can't just do a little bit, take a break and then come back. It has to be consistent to see success.
Yeah. And you can start small. And man, you covered a lot of ground in just that last note, but such a real thing, right? You have sleep issues and you can start popping melatonin and make things worse, or you can address some of your chronic work stress, right? Some of your work-life balance issues. You have indigestion. Are you going to pop Rolaids, or are you going to maybe fix your work stress? And they're all intertwined, right? Mind and body, everything. And so I like how you presented a lot of different options. I felt the same way, like traditional meditation. It wasn't for me, but then I can even cut back recently where some guided meditations like yoga nidra is way more beneficial to me now than when I tried years ago. And in the interim, I was more introduced to notions of moving meditation or working out. And I love listening to podcasts. I love listening to music to get myself amped up. But sometimes I work out purposefully without input, or I go on a walk with my dog without head earbuds, right? Just to be in the space, to hear the breeze, that's all helpful, right? Whether it's yard work, whatever your thing is. So think broadly, right? And look at different inputs like this, Max podcast, just to recognize that there's a lot of array of what your options might be. And, a lot of, man, even going back to when you're talking about training, like a new officer, I don't think that there's going to be a lot of people that are those C-level officers listening to either of our podcasts, but just in case there are, maybe they don't recognize it, but just drop the shame, right? Drop the shame that you perceive or you put yourself under of like, hey, I'm new, I don't know how to do this. Cool. Tell somebody, hey, I'm new, I don't know how to do this, but I'd like to do it. Cool if I hit you up for questions. Dude, any senior officer or sergeant is going to be like, yes, go forth and conquer, right? Let me know. I'll be in your ear, whatever, right? And so that is how you learn. Get over it. Release the shame of that. Release the shame of, the mental stress and stigmas. And I think that's like a huge word that we could focus on is just do what we can to remove a degree of that for ourselves and everyone we work with.
Yeah, 100%. That's it's that old rule. And for the younger guys listening, your peers and your FDOs and sergeants, they'll much rather pull you back than need to push you forward. They're going to want to see that initiative. And it's a lot of things, man. There's so much that we could cover in in the mental health stuff. But if you find if you're trying to change your life, the rule is that if you do it for 30 days, you could probably do it for the rest of your life. And that includes vices such as smoking, chewing, all these things, energy drinks that I know a lot of cops drink. There's so much that the body can take. The body can handle one vice. It can't handle multiple. So if you do have that one thing, fine. Don't abuse it. Don't go past what your body, and everyone knows the way that I can put it into a sentence is, your body. And if it's telling you something, listen to it. There's a really good book that all cops should read called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a very heavy piece of literature that if you read it once, you'd probably reconsider a lot of the things that you do. You mentioned walking your dog. If you spend, I would even say, a half hour, just find the time and make it a priority. And the other trick to making yourself see the perspective that I like to use is, instead of saying I don't have time, use the words it's not a priority, and you're going to feel like a piece of shit. So, I don't have time.
We
to
all
call
have
grandma.
choices, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Calling grandma isn't a priority. It sounds much worse. Or, I don't have time to work out. Working out isn't a priority. I don't have time to, I don't have time to spend with my kids. My children aren't a priority. Use that perspective, and that goes for relationships and everything else in between, because at the end of the day, we want to live as long as we can, as healthy as we can. And, eventually we're going to have to, negotiate this world with less strength and old age. So everything we're doing now is going to pave the way for us in the future, to include especially our mental health. So.
Dude, I love that. What a fantastic note to end on, right? Focus, identify, orient your priorities with some grit, with some zen. Mac, thank you so much for being on, and I definitely want to have you back on, but please, for the audience, let us know where people can find you, what you're working on.
So I'm currently in season 2 of the podcast. Season 2 is going to incorporate a lot of different people, not necessarily law enforcement specific, but people that can help the cause and the mission. I'm going to have Greg Walsh on pretty soon, who's a really interesting dude out of Rochester, New York. He owns Wolf Brigade Gym. He got me turned on to the mace, which is a really, really cool piece of equipment.
I got to send you a picture of my homemade mace with a bowling ball.
Yeah, anything. If you have a sledgehammer, it can all work. But yeah, season 2 is gonna have a lot more. I guess it'll be a little more eclectic compared to season 1, which I'm excited about. Social media is the Zen Cop on Instagram. I have a Twitter, but I don't really use it. Email is thezencop@gmail.com. The blog is thezencop.com. I'm a lot more active on the podcast stuff. I used to integrate both, but for purposes of time management and my own sanity, I stick to the podcast stuff.
That's a lot, man.
I'm happy to communicate. If people have questions, I try to respond to DMs as much as possible. I set aside time on Sundays to get back to people. So I'm really happy to listen, or, if you need to talk about something, I'm happy to give advice. So anytime, day or night, if anyone needs anything, please reach out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mac. And we'll be watching, and we'll connect soon.
Sounds good, man. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.